Hey guys, here's a quick tutorial on how to smooth out a model that you've gotten in, pulled down off the internet, something like that. Saw this request on Reddit on how to improve the look of polygons in a 3D model. So I'm in Blender here. The model I pulled down off of Thingiverse is an object format. It's this Goblin Slayer helmet. So it's pretty big. Got a blank scene. I'll just remove these because I don't want them in there. I'll just delete those. I'll hit Shift C. It'll zoom me out so I can get a good look at it. And you can see here it is a quad mesh. So the problem with quad meshes, not really a problem with quad meshes, it's good, but is if we go to export that as an STL file, let me put that in. We'll call it. So I'm exporting this. I'm going to do selection only. I'm going to export that as an STL, like you might want to print it. I'll go ahead and remove this, and I'll go to File, Import STL. I'm going to pull that same STL back in that I just exported, and what you'll see is these faces here, right? They don't look particularly good. A lot of these surfaces need a more, they're kind of concave, so the triangles collapse and cut into the smoothness of it. Looks pretty terrible here. I'm going to move that to a different layer and put that on layer, whatever this layer is. I'm going to re-import that object file. And so again, you can see with quads it looks pretty smooth. What I'm going to do is add a modifier to that called subdivision surfaces. So click this little gear, I click the drop down, and we've got subdivision surface. You can see it's already starting to smooth it out. You can see it's beginning to kind of mess up the model a little bit there, right around there. You can see it. What we're going to do is bump that up to, we'll say 2. When you look at this model, we've got these green lines. Now those in Blender, they're actually kind of bluish. It's kind of hard to tell, but what that means is that's the sharpness for the actual material and UV mapping, I think. So I'll set this to the edges down here. There's this nice little button. And I'll pick one of these green. Yeah, there you can see it's kind of greenish color. So I'll select that and I'll say select under the select menu, select similar by sharpness. So it's going to grab me all those little green edges that they've already mapped out for me, which is nice. And what I'm going to do is get rid of some of this kind of shape. It's lost by hitting Shift E, which is your edge crease. It's going to increase the sharpness of it, and you can see it's already, you can see it expanding out to fill the shape, right? Looks like there's probably a few other edges we could add in there to enhance this little end bit here. You can kind of see the tip doesn't quite come to a nice point. Oops, not that one. Not that one. So I selected the lines to kind of continue it. Get a nice crisp edge all the way around. Hit Shift E again, and I'll pull it out. You can see it's come down to a point now. You can kind of work your way through the different bits of this model and sharpen it up and clean it up as you want. Overall, I think it translated pretty well, pretty quickly, just off of selecting those edges. Luckily, the creator has made those predefined groups. Some of these edges are triangles that probably don't need to be. So I can hit this hold on, let me select by face. I think if I hit Alt J, maybe, yeah, you can see that's Alt J to collapse that into a face. Depending on where it's at, you kind of have to see if that's an appropriate spot to hit it at. You can actually select them all and have it automatically collapse them. I'm not sure I've had the best luck with that. But ooh, yeah, I see that collapse does not look particularly good, so I might try and looks a little bit better there. So and you can probably go find triangles all over this mesh that can be collapsed into quads that maybe they should have been quads, maybe they shouldn't have been quads. These little separations here probably never needed to happen. You get into some more complicated stuff trying to collapse something other than just a triangle that used to be a quad and maybe got split at some point. And there's some other various problems with the model that could probably be fixed to make it easier to 3D print. One thing you can do is, or like for example, this is a solid object and it's bisecting another solid object, but it doesn't. They're not unionized. They're not joined, and you know your slicer may or may not have issues with that. Most of the time, it doesn't have it, but. So what we can see here is if I go out of edit mode here, and you get into edit mode by hitting tab on the object, and it'll take you down where you can edit the individual faces. Out of edit mode I can hit Z and it shows me how many faces I've added, I guess. Over on our modifier panel there's a little eyeball and I can hide it, and you can see this was the original quad mesh that was there. With smoothing turned on, we've got quite a bit more smoothness, and that'll be reflected when we export it. I'm not gonna go much higher than this right now. You can increase the smoothness, or I mean I guess the smoothness of the surface by adding more divisions, which really starts to reflect maybe on more complicated models. Not so much on this one. But I'm going to export this as an STL. Same thing I did last time, selection only. I'm going to call this one Goblin Slayer 2. And it takes a second. I'll go back to my layer that has this really unattractive mash of triangles, right? And no matter what, you can't put a quad mesh into an STL. It's always going to switch it to triangles when you do that export. I'm going to import that STL back in, and you can see it's over 10 megs now versus before it was 600K, so it adds a lot of detail, and that's still pretty unattractive, but it's going to look a little bit better when you print, right? There's probably some other ways we can improve that, but let's go ahead and bump it up one more and see if we can get it fairly smooth. I'll increase the view one more to 3. I don't think render really matters, but I'll increase it again. And you know what? Actually, just for the sake of the demonstration, we'll put it at 4. That's going to make it really dense. It's going to make a big file, but we'll export that as an STL. And we'll do that one as 3. And I'm willing to bet that one's going to look pretty huge in terms of the file size, but you know, if you can save time on printing later, it's definitely helpful. That's taking a while. My computer's not the fastest, but it's definitely not slow, so it's going to be a pretty big file. I'll have to go a little bit longer. I guess you have to have a little bit of patience. Okay, now let's import it back in and line it up against the other ones. We'll go to File, Import, STL. This one's up to 167 megs, so they're getting pretty huge here. Depending on the speed of your computer and the slicer you use, it may not even be able to slice a 167 meg file. You just gotta figure it out. I guess I should play some cool background music on this video, but I don't really have any. Certainly none that is probably allowed to be played without paying some kind of copyright fee. All right, there we go. So we're definitely seeing good quality off of that. So there you have it, the initial export here. Looks pretty rough. 2 levels of iterations of smoothness. Still looks pretty rough, but a lot better. And then 4 definitely brings that smoothness. And again, if you're working on something like this, it's not just like, oh, it's that fast. You know, you're going to want to go through, and I can see some edges right here already that probably needed to be sharpened or edge creased to retain shape and look their best. But you know, it's going to be up to you to go and fix that, so and adjust it how you want. So there you have it. Pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, just let me know. All right, thanks guys.